No,
Um,
that's good. That's what I actually wanted to get out of you because I mean, it's incredible what you've done in your life so far and how it's looked. But those two things specifically, the earthquake and the blockades, when was that, and what did that look like exactly?
yeah. Did you know the earthquake was on my 21st birthday?
I didn't know that it was. That's crazy. Whoa.
Yeah.
I remember that it
Yeah.
was
It's,
around that time, but I had no idea it fell right on your birthday. Wow.
yep. April 25th, 2015. So yeah, the earthquake was wild. Our area was okay. Like there wasn't death and destruction everywhere like there was in Kathmandu. Um, yeah, I want to avoid just getting into like the stories of the earthquake and everything, but generally what happened was a lot of responsibility and weight fell on mine and Shawnee's shoulders in an instant, like as soon as the earthquake hit. We already had a few of the girls living in the guest house at that time, the guest house that we had. And then, yeah, the earthquake hit and none of us could sleep in there. And so we were all just kind of tenting out in the fields. And then I had contact with this organization, Crisis Response International. And so they contacted me and they're like, hey, we're sending a team. Is there any way you can host a team and set the team up in the mountains? Um, so, so I set this team of like 14 Americans. I received them in Kathmandu, and Shawnee held down the fort in Pokhara, held down everything. People freaking out and having PTSD and everything. Shawnee and I both responded quite well, quite playfully, and like we were shaken, but we were kind of like young and wild and energetic about it, and kind of like, okay, this is like an opportunity for us to really do, really help people. People are like literally 9,000 people just died, and people are trying to dig their families out all across this country. So yeah, Shawnee held down the fort, tried as well as she could to look after all of the people in Pokhara. One of the girls at that time ran away, and that was kind of the end of our relationship with her, other than a few crazy happenstances later. But she ran away just from the trauma and stuff like that. Anyway, so I set this team of Americans up. I received them in Kathmandu, and I took them up like a day later, and they're all like half sick and getting Jardy and everything, and like all the roads are closed. I set them up in the village way north of Kathmandu, in this tiny little village that we had like this random contact in, and I set them up with like these Nepali translators. And then I was like, sweet, you're good, like you're set up. I helped them like dig out a bunch of the buildings for like one day, then I left. And then the second earthquake hit and nearly flattened that entire village. And all of those Americans, like within a day or something, had the embassy fly them home, and left all the Nepalis there. And they were all
No
traumatized.
way.
Yeah, I read this article
Whoa.
from one of
I didn't
them.
remember this.
Yeah, so I read an article from one of
Dang.
them in America, and it was this article of this woman, this poor woman, who had gone to Nepal to try and help with the earthquake, and she was like in this tiny village which was almost flattened, and the roads were closed on both sides, and they had to get a helicopter from the embassy to get out. And anyway, so they called me. I was on the lake with Shawnee at that time, and they called me after the second earthquake, and they're like, hey, so we're leaving. We have the embassy coming with a helicopter. This was just after the second earthquake. And I was like, okay, so you're going to get the translators back home? And they're like, no, the embassy won't, like, they're only going to take Americans. They're not going to take any Nepalis. I was like,
No
one of you guys,
way.
I was like, one of you guys or somebody in your group has to demand that the Nepalis get taken back to Kathmandu, because they're some of our best friends. And like, it sucks because all the Nepalis in that village, just like all of the Nepalis in every other village, they didn't get they didn't get to leave. That was their home, and
Hmm.
help wasn't exactly on the way either. And so that sucks. But our friends who I'd set up, Hannah and Kumar, you might have met them when you were in Nepal. Hannah and Kumar, who we had set up, we were like, you have to get them back to Kathmandu. So they did. And then they went home and wrote an article about how traumatized they were. So that was terrible. Lots of like the whole country was pushed back, I don't know, maybe 5 years or more in terms of its development just from having the whole place knocked over. And yeah, it was terrible. The place is so corrupt. I read or I heard, I think it was the UN estimated that about 3% of the donations from other countries actually got to Nepalese, 97% or something like that. Over 90% went just straight into the hands of the government. So they just,
man,
yeah, it's such a bummer. They stopped everything. They stopped everything coming on the airplanes. They stopped everything coming in, even Western Union. You couldn't Western Union more than like a small amount of money because the government was trying to seize everything. It was just like that saying, never let tragedy go to waste or something. There's a saying like that anyway. So that's what the government did. And they ended up with all these new blue license plates, which means newly issued government vehicles. So,
wow.
Yeah, such a mess. Anyway, that was, our building was fine. We didn't have to really do much, fill in a few cracks and that kind of stuff. But our area was okay. Things kind of started to go back to normal. Only like 3 months later, we got married. Yeah, 3 months later, we got married in Nepal. And then we went back, and that's when the Indian government shut its border to Nepal, which was its way of trying to pressure Nepal to stay Hindu instead of become secular. And that people said, and I believe that shortage was like almost as bad as the earthquakes on Nepal. It was so hard because Nepal has the Himalayas to the north, borders China, and there's a bit of a road going through there, but there wasn't a road after the earthquake. So the only border into Nepal was the southern border, which was India, and they closed the entire thing, which meant like lots of medical supplies stopped, lots of like rice, so many items that Nepalese needed. Gas, that was the worst. So yeah, that winter was really hard. Like we had no hot water, and we only had like 2 hours a day of electricity all through that winter. And winter in Pokhara got to like, at the very coldest, it would get to freezing overnight. And so it was always like pretty cold, but people weren't dying of the cold or anything. But yeah, it was like some of the girls at the guest house would walk at least a couple kilometers down the road to the nearest place where they could get firewood. And then they'd carry it on their head to come back just to heat, just to boil like rice and just to make their rice and stuff like that. So it was, wow, man.
So what's I can't remember exactly what the timeline was. When was, you said April 25th, 2015 was the first earthquake. When was the second earthquake? And then was it, so you said that winter. So when did the border close?
I think the border closed in October or November. I think it was October because it was right around festival time. Because Nepal tried to implement its constitution on September 27th, I think, of 2015 still. So basically, April 25th, my birthday, earthquake. July 7th, I get married in Nepal. Then I go to Canada and I go to America and watch you get married in August. We go back to Nepal and the border closes. So that's basically how it happened. October and November, they closed the border, and we were there through to June on that trip before we took a trip to Australia. And yeah, I think it was about 5 months of that was the border being closed. It was terrible. Like, it was really hard. I look back and we were so like gung-ho and ready to just be crazy, but it was exhausting. It took so much of our life and soul out of us just to make it through. And meanwhile, we're trying to like start all this stuff. And yeah, it was really hard on the country, hard on us.